Hi. Whoops. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the episode, what was it, 17 of Brews with the Dudes live podcast. Little disclaimer here. This is the second live one of the night. I went back and I just double checked everything and realized the audio problems I was having where there was silence on some of the different scenes that I was showing you guys. Like a couple more of them had issues with it, and it was so kind of random that it was like, well, I can't fix this in post and still have it be like entertaining for anybody to watch. So if you care to rejoin, if you were watching earlier and suddenly you realize that the audio went away and you didn't have a way to chat it in, because as I looked at it, the chat function was failing too. It's just both the software and YouTube creating some issues for us. So I'm re-recording this. I don't know if you happen to watch. Thank you very much. I'm just going to let everybody know that I'm redoing it since we had so many different issues. Let me just copy this thing, reshare it. Yeah, what a pain in the ass. All right. Sorry about that. Okay, everybody. So Brews the Dudes, this is number 17. Thank you very much for joining us. This is a solo podcast because Donnie is out of town. Solo apparently means I'm going to miss little things because I don't have somebody else to bounce ideas off of and talk and have two different eyes on catching things like audio levels not working and stuff. So, whoops. So here we are, solo for the week. The beer of the week is Lift Bridge Juice Z. Juice Z. It's a Northeast IPA. So I already had one because obviously I recorded this. I was just going to sound like I'm all bitter. So this one's not going to go 50 minutes like the last one either, because there's no way I'm going to... I mean, unless I have enough of these things, there's no way I'm going to ramble for that long again, which, I mean, maybe it's the benefit of you guys. So, this is Lift Bridge, which I had figured out earlier was based out of Stillwater, Minnesota. They must have some kind of a lift bridge there. As far as I know, Duluth is like one of the last aerial lift bridges in the United States. We've got, it's a little bridge that goes from Canal Park, and which is sort of like our really touristy area, which used to be strictly industrial. And it goes across to what's called Park Point, which is actually one of the longest freshwater beaches or shorelines, depends who you talk to, in the U.S. It's pretty beautiful. It's become really touristy, but there's actually a shitload of like really cool little like sort of beach town like houses on it. Like they're all like pretty small. A lot of them are pretty small. And then of course you've got a couple of like rich assholes that moved in and built this mansion, this McMansion, like right on the beach, which there aren't too many of those. It's mostly like the really old school looking places, but it's got this really neat feel to it. So that's what kind of the Canal Park, Park Point area is like. And we've got an aerial lift bridge that gets you across it. And we've had it for ages. And this aerial lift bridge lifts up so that we have 1,000-foot ore boats that'll actually go underneath it. And they ship taconite all over the country. So I didn't realize that Stillwater had a lift bridge in it, which is kind of amazing. When you think about it. I didn't realize there are too many of those things left, but I mean, maybe I'm wrong. I'm not like a bridge nerd, so I don't really know. But so we're just going to bounce back, kind of recover everything that I had talked about earlier, and we probably had silence through a lot of it. Okay. We're going to talk a little bit about history here now, and we're going to... So I already spoiled it because these are all the pictures that were up earlier. We're going to be talking about the brand Reliant. And so what we got here is the car of the week, the history piece of the week, is actually about the Reliant Regal. Oh, I almost lost all of my beers here. pull that forward. So the Reliant Regal Mark One, it debuted back in like 1951. It didn't reach production until 1953, but so that's what these crazy little things look like. This I don't think was the oldest version. It's very close. The one of the ones like convertible, I think that's coming up here in the pictures is actually one of the oldest ones. But so okay, Reliant. If you ever heard of these things, you most likely have heard about them either because you live in the UK and you've seen them running around, or if you're in any of the other countries where I'm sure these things didn't make their way to. Um, the Reliant cars are three-wheeled cars, and they're not three-wheeled in the way that like the BMW Isetta has, or like I think it's Yamaha Slingshot or whatever, like the crazy ass thing that they have now. Both of those, which like the Slingshot and the Isetta are basically the same thing. They're clearly not, but the difference with those two and why they're a little more stable is they've got the two tires in the front. So the steering tires, there's multiple of them. There's not a single one like the Reliant has, which there's literally one tire that steers the thing in the front. And if you think about if you do anything even slightly off camber, what's going to happen? The front of that thing is going to just tip right over, and you're just going to flop over and roll down the road. Like you're going to roll this car inevitably at some point in your ownership. And what's hilarious about that is it's actually a little video I'm going to show you guys in a minute here. But I'm going to show you a couple different versions of the Regal. So this was another like later model version of the Regal. I think this was one of the 70s cars, which they switched in the early 70s to the newer model, which I'll talk about in a minute here. But so this is also a Regal, but this one's kind of cool because this is sort of like I don't know, what they used it for. I don't know, independent trading seas, whatever that is. I don't know, maybe they use it for somebody's business or something like that. Old school briefcase and roof rack on it. It's pretty cute. Yeah, so these are the different versions of the Regal, and this one is by far my favorite because I love that it looks like a Metropolitan Nash. It's so old school and cute looking. I would drive that. In fact, I would probably put two tires on the front of that thing just so that I could drive it and not be terrified. It probably wouldn't be that hard to actually put two wheels on the front of it to change up the whole steering and braking system. Because you could probably just treat it like a go-kart. I mean, so from what I've read, these things have a aluminum body and an ash frame. So this thing was sitting on a wood frame, which is terrifying. Probably why there's not a ton of them left. So how easy would it be to pop that body off of there and set it down on a go-kart chassis? Because you can see how little this thing is. It can't be more than like 13, 12 feet long, like this little teeny cute thing. So it'd be super easy to just, tweak one of these and actually have a slightly more usable drivetrain and stuff on it. So these are powered by a 747cc water-cooled engine, which, I mean, that's kind of cool for its time. It was using water-cooled. Whereas a lot of like these little funky cars from back in the day, it seemed like air cooled was being used a fair amount. The Isetta, if I remember correctly, was an air cooled car. The Citroen Deux Chevaux was a 2CV, which I don't remember. I think it was like Jerry Seinfeld called it a Deux Chevaux, which I think that's actually how you say it. Whatever, I sound pretentious. It's a 2CV. Anyways, those were air cooled. I think the Saab, they had a Saab back in the day that also had a little air cooled. I think it was a 2-stroke actually. I like these little weird cars that had air cooled engines, basically motorcycle motors. And this one was actually water cooled, so they're ahead of the times with their ash frame and their 3 wheels. And so that brings us to the replacement of this, which was the Reliant Robin. So Reliant Robin, made famous, well, I mean, made famous to my generation, which I'm an elder millennial. I'm 37 years old and almost a Gen Xer, but still a millennial. Um, these were made famous to us from Top Gear. So in one of the episodes of Top Gear, Clarkson, Hammond, and May. Uh, Clarkson, I think, was shown driving these things the most. I think it was his segment, and so I mean, it basically opens with him just like tipping the thing over, and that is basically the whole series on that car. And so here we are for your viewing pleasure, and hopefully the audio is quiet enough that you can still hear me fine. Um, so I'm gonna go on a little bit of a tangent here in talking about Top Gear. So I mean, this to me was one of the most. I love that when I was checking this week's car history facts, that it talked about the Reliant cars, because this is one of my favorite episodes, where they where Clarkson's driving around in this insane little car that I had no idea existed, and apparently they sold really well in Europe. Um, I never would have guessed, because I can't imagine anybody would want to own one of these things as a daily driver. Like, they would see that car and they'd go, surely I must have that. Like, I don't feel that way. I mean, again, going back to, like, I would probably modify it and do something cool with it, and maybe put, like, 2 tires in the front of it, maybe. Or just, like, one really fat one, so that it's, like, at least a little bit more stable. But anyway, so I loved this episode, and in this, like, I love this, like, another car comes flying into it. I mean, they must have pissed off the purists so much from this episode, crashing these things so much. But the crazy thing is they sold pretty good. Like, apparently, of, like, the small cars that were out there at the time, these things sold super good. I never would have guessed it. So there's actually a ton of them on the street, and as you guys saw a moment ago, in this episode, if you didn't already see it, in this episode that it just showed, is that they went to a car enthusiasts meet for these ridiculous little cars, and of course Clarkson enters the show rolling sideways into it, which, I mean, I have to assume anybody who's driven these things understands that that's bound to happen. All right. Lift Bridge Juice Z Northeast IPA. This thing's super good. I'm gonna go on a tangent on that occasionally. Oh, Donnie is 10 minutes from Minnesota. So I'm flying solo today, because Mr. Donnie is he's been out of town for work, and so what that's meant is that he's training down in one of our flyover states, and here, we didn't have a podcast last week, and I had a bunch of people telling me that I should have done a podcast solo, which, I mean, I can't imagine people would want to listen to me, but what was kind of nice is, like, in the screwed up first version of this recorded thing I did tonight, there was actually a few people that signed on to it, so I'm sorry that you guys ended up watching a garbage first podcast, because I missed the audio issues. But so Donnie's on his way back now, and we're going to kind of resume our normal podcast next week, which I'll talk a little bit later on here about what exactly our plan is for next week. But it looks like he is on his way back to D-Town. He's about 10 miles out of Minnesota, so unfortunately, he's not going to make it back in time to hop on to this very late podcast unless we recorded it at like 1 o'clock in the morning. And I'm sure he's excited to get home and fondle his wife. So let's move on here. So let's talk a little bit about the updates with the Ford and projects that we have going on in the garage here. Hey, look at that. The audio is still working. Amazing. When you go through and double check these things to make sure they work, they work. So, the Ford is kind of where you guys saw it left off. I mean, we'll talk a little bit in a minute here about the most recent episode out on our main channel. We have a steering system in this thing. This car steers and it brakes, and now we need to make that engine pretty and run. So we pop the motor out. Here it is on our sweet engine stand, which you guys can see in one of our Dad Mods episodes, how we made that thing blue and 4 legs, or 4 points of contact. I'll say there aren't 4 legs on it. There's 4 points of contact. Yeah, it was pretty cool. It was fun to actually build that thing, and we got a little bit of shit about it because people were just like, "Why? Like, why wouldn't you just buy a 4 post?" Well, because we had a 3 point of contact engine stand already, and we thought, "What the hell? Let's make this thing work a little bit better." So, and it did. It's worked really good, and it actually holds massive engines on it now that are normally very tippy on a three post or 3 point engine stand. So this thing works pretty slick. So we got a dirty, filthy old truck motor, much to the dismay of quite a few people that I think were hoping that we were going to be able to make that 302 work, but man, that thing fought us. In retrospect, if I would have dug a little bit more, I mean, maybe an earlier version of the Ford motor might have fit a little bit better. Or maybe they're all the same, and maybe it still would have been a problem. But there were just so many things that were going to be either very expensive to make work, or they were going to be 100% custom, which I just did not feel comfortable with some of that custom work. So what we did was we grabbed the most logical power plant that's going to fit in the front of an S10, and that was an LS engine. Now, if I can be candid for a minute and talk about, kind of what my preferences would have been for this build, obviously a 302, like a performance 302 would have been a great power plant. That one basically fell into my lap from a good friend who had an Explorer that he was plucking the motor out of. He actually has a handful of them. It's kind of an Explorer enthusiast, and he's got a LS Turbo Explorer, which, if you want to talk about pissing off the purists. But here's the thing, it makes crazy power, and it's super nice. So what we had was a 302 swap that we acquired from him, but it was a late model version with the electronic transmission and a kind of more complicated fuel injection and ignition system. Stupid leather seat. So that just meant like a lot of hoops. So if I can talk about what my ideal engines would be for this thing, and if it was sort of price is not really an issue, the Coyote engine was honestly my priority. That would have been the number one engine that I could run in this thing. But they are still super expensive, and that's kind of the problem. Is like the buy-in of a Coyote motor is so damn high. And honestly, I'm a broke new dad to a second child. And if anybody who has kids knows how flippin' expensive those things are, now is not the point in my life when I should be taking on many thousands of dollars in expense to put a Coyote motor in my old car, when honestly the LS engine is going to work just fine. So the Coyote would be one of my priorities, and actually an old Mopar motor. An old school Hemi would be amazing in this thing, because if you can fit a big block Ford or a big block Chevy in there, you should be able to fit a Hemi in it pretty well, like an old version. Because they're gorgeous. They're beautiful looking motors. They sound awesome. They make a ton of power. I mean, if you do like a fuel injection system on them too, you can actually make them pretty reliable. You can update a lot of components on them. So that would have been one of my ideals. I actually looked at Toyota V8s. The 1UZ, 1, 2, and 3 UZ engines are all pretty amazing. The 1 UZ would have been the easiest to make work. But that just in terms of fitment, as far as I know, nobody's actually stuck a 1UZ in an S10 chassis, so that would have been a little bit of a gamble, and we might have ended up with a very similar situation to the 302. So I just decided to do the LS. So here we are. We've got an LS engine, and I need to try and make this thing pretty, which they aren't the prettiest motors to begin with. The intakes are hideous on these things. The valve covers are they're okay. I mean, they're hardly valve covers when you really look at them, because all the classics, they have a pretty decent sized valve cover on it. They're pretty pronounced. These things are like these little teeny covers, which does give them a really unique look, but you have the coils that sit on the top of it. And when you're putting that in a classic car, that doesn't necessarily look right. You want sort of minimalism as much as possible with a classic car, or you want it to look like a badass performance vehicle. But either way, the coils sitting on the top of the valve covers doesn't necessarily look that great. So a little bit of a carrot dangle here, but what I went ahead and did is I bought a bunch of components that are going to make this look really classic, but still function and perform like a modern fuel injection, which it is going to be staying fuel injection. So my stack of parts here is ever growing. Bear with me, I've got to click on a little teeny icon. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a tease here. So you'll notice a little component in the center there. That is sort of the heart of this whole operation, and that is a Holly sniper system. So staying EFI. And we'll show you guys in upcoming videos of how exactly we're making this thing work and making it look so damn pretty. Now, with that said, we need to talk about the powder coating setup that is required to make this work. So we're going to plop on down here. Ba-doop. All right, so... and I've talked about this enough times that I am hopefully not talking about it again, because I had to record this podcast once before. And the reason why we don't have a current video out is because we needed to build a powder coating setup for the garage. So I've done a ton of powder coating in this thing, and there's some jackass that lives around here that's got this piece of shit Honda Accord that he just guns it every time he leaves his, there it goes, leaves his girlfriend's place or something. And I think we've got the Civic, the shitbox race car out there, which I'm sure just instigates him every time he sees it. Yeah, you can see him you can hear him from like 2 blocks away, because I'm pretty sure the thing's like open downpipe. But anyway. So what we're doing is we're building a powder coating booth. So the next episode is actually going to be on how we're building this. It's sort of it's a DIY. It's how we did it. What that's going to do is it's going to show you guys sort of how we put this thing together and why. So I've done a ton of powder coating. I've got a little side thing that I've been doing for ages now. So I've been powder coating for... oh, goodness. Almost 10 years, honestly. Actually, no, 10 years. Like, I've been powder coating for a little over a decade. And I've taken a couple of years off from it because what it ended up happening is just trashed my garage so bad, because I never did a good job with sort of managing the overspray. So powder coat is extremely fine and it hangs in the air. And what that means is that ends up on everything. So if you don't have a way to try and manage the powder, you end up with it just covering everything. So I decided I'm taking on ceramic coating now too, because I want to ceramic coat components on the LS engine. And what better way to do that than to have a dedicated spray booth? So that's what we've got here. We've got an actual spray booth that's kind of shaped like a little bit of a closet. And it's going to have a couple of filters on it with box fans. We'll see how efficient this system works. Right now, the reason the video isn't out yet is because I'm just kind of testing stuff to see what's the right kind of filter. And the last step is going to be coating it in a gloss white paint and sealing it up, because this is a paneling type that you shouldn't get wet. And I want to be able to wipe this thing down. So it's 1/4-inch paneling all the way, stick frame, and then a birch, I think it's either birch or pine 1/4-inch plywood on the top of it, with a plexiglass window to a 4,000 lumen light. So that's why it has a really nice bright pop to it. And what you got here is you have these box fans on the back side of it that help filter everything out. So Works pretty good. It's hilarious. Here you can actually see the paneling on the inside of it and how ridiculous all of that ends up looking. But so we put that on the back side of it, and there's actually sealant. There's a rubber seal that's on all of the fans, so that helps keep all the vacuum. And what's funny is like the vacuum, like it's so sealed that when we put the fans on, and when I experimented with a really high MERV rating filter on it, which means that it's like it filters really well, the fans slowed way down. They slowed down to a medium from a high. So it's hilarious that that the filters work that good, but that's impeding the amount of vacuum. You need as much airflow as possible because that creates as much vacuum. So unfortunately, I would prefer to use these like really high MERV rating filters, which means that it's filtering the air way better. But you even get a little bit of powder coat that builds up on that filter, and it's not going to flow as good. So that means that you're basically going to end up with no vacuum inside of the system. So the trade-off is I have to run something with like less filtration, or I need to have way stronger vacuum source. And I might eventually look into some better fan setups, but this is the best that I can do right now. Dust collection is not cheap, and the shape of this thing does allow me to make plenums and stuff, but I don't really want to mess around with that just yet. Ideally, I want to try and make this work. So here we are, and I'm going to test out a like MERV 7, and I've got a MERV 2. So we're going to see how those work, and then the video will eventually be out. So that's the next step in getting the LS prettied up, and we've got one other LS, and we've got one other build that is going to take up the entire winter, which you guys will see soon enough here. And there's going to be a lot of powder coating done on that to try and make this motor really pretty. That's going to be going into Donnie's car. So we're doing a motor swap in the E30, and we need the thing to look gorgeous. So that's kind of where things are at with the current videos. Just to touch on the most recent video, so we've got episode 7 of the Shoebox Ford build series, and that is where we did the steering system in the Ford. Kind of what I alluded to earlier. We went through the whole process of it. We put a Speedway steering column in it. We got all the steering linkage and everything like that set up so it works mint on the Ford chassis. And yeah, it's exciting because you can sit in the car now and you can push on the brake and the brake works, and you can like actually turn the wheels and stuff through the Contour really gorgeous steering wheel that I had picked up. I'm really glad that I went that route and actually got this Speedway steering column and the Contour wheel. Like, it doesn't have all original Ford components in it, which it's always nice to try and keep those things, but the steering column, there was no keeping that thing. I mean, I should say there's no, like, you could, but it would have been a huge pain in the ass, and it just, it would have been, it's nice to have things like tilt and the turn signals built into it and a hazard switch built into it, and it's modern, so it's like if, God forbid, you get in an accident, you end up having to collide with it. The steering column is meant to give a little bit, whereas like the old Ford one is nicknamed the Spear of Death in these things, because if you hit it, originally on the old Ford frame, the old Ford front clip, it was like solid mounted to the chassis, so it was like headbutting the actual chassis. Pretty terrifying. So all these modern components on that now, there's like a little bit more give in all of these things. It's still not great. We're still going to try and put shoulder seat belts in this car, but this is a little bit better than the Spear of Death. Anyways, so that's the most recent video, so definitely check that thing out. If you haven't already, maybe give it a second watch just because you like watching our videos so much. Now, we had a event here recently, this last Sunday, which was freezing cold. So the final Machines and Caffeine of the year took place on Sunday. And now, normally we don't host events in October, but It was encouraged by some others, and we thought, what the heck, let's try and make it work. And it was pretty fun. There were hardly any cars that actually made it out. Ironically, of the cars that made it out, we had one of a gentleman named Tony Netzel, who runs the Cruise for Cancer events. Awesome dude. He has a couple of pretty amazing cars, and he brought out his Roadrunner. So this is early in the morning, right when we were first getting started. The Legacy GT actually needs a little bit of love right now, so I've been driving my OBS pickup, and the Civic was around, so I thought, what better than, since there's salt on the road, I'll just take this Civic down there, and people got quite the kick out of it that checked it out. It was cold. It was very cold. This is the Roadrunner. Got a few beautiful pictures of that, and it was so cold that we made a little fire, and we all hung out around the fire and bullshitted and talked about Cruise for Cancer, what an amazing event that was, and how much fun it was, and the successes and everything. The fact that it raised $52,000, which is absolutely incredible. So it was a good time. That was the last Machines and Caffeine of the year. Now I'm going to be working on taking all of the video that I have from it and putting together a little highlight reel of it. We've got a bunch of photos that we're still editing, so that we're going to be uploading those pretty quick here. And then later on this winter, a little bit more towards the spring, we're going to start working on the schedule for 2021, which hopefully will not include COVID-related adjustments, which would be amazing if we could get our lives back. So, and thank you very much to all of you guys that made it out to these events. We have a lot of fun with it. It's a short and sweet event that happens on Sunday mornings in a really cool part of town with really cool people. It's laid back. We don't try and get too crazy with the event because it seems like everybody loves it the way that it is. So thank you, everybody who's made it out this year. We're going to be looking forward to doing it again next year. The same kind of format. And hopefully by that point, you know, like Ursa Minor's parking lot will be available again. Or maybe it'll be occupied by yoga instructors, which... that was probably to a lot of people's enjoyment for a couple of those events. So let's talk a little bit about ice racing. We've got a local ice racing league, which happens here in Duluth, Minnesota, as well as Soup Town. So Superior, Wisconsin is right next door to us. It's sort of like our sister city, which is, I mean, I shouldn't actually call it a sister city because that's not the right word for it. There we go. Audio's working. Amazing. Imagine that. Yeah, so Superior is like well, it's a city that's very close to us. It's right across the bridge. It is in another state, but it's basically like it's an extension of Duluth and vice versa. People probably jumped on my throat for saying it that way, but really it's kind of like the slightly more conservative version of Duluth. Superior is an awesome city, and we happen to race over there in one of their bays. And this is a really cool ice racing league. It is a circle track ice racing league, which I mean, we would prefer there to be some turns, but this is the style that they've been running on for a while now. So the Civic was built for this ice racing league, and we still have not been able to race in it, which is crazy. It is, so it's circle track, and it's wheel to wheel, which means that that's part of why the Civic was built the way that it was, with like door bars and all that kind of stuff, which is intended to be like one extra measure if you ever get hit on the side, because collisions can happen in this racing, and you know, with these old shitty cars, we just want to have every bit that we can to try and kind of protect the drivers. So anyways, this series happens throughout the winter here. They have upwards of, I think, 12 races, or I think it's maybe 16 in like really, really good years, which I don't think we had too many really good years in a long time, because winters are a lot warmer than they used to be up here. But apparently, and I did a little bit of research on this, the weather, the National Weather Service, and some of the weather predictions have said that it's going to be a colder winter and a snowier winter. So I don't know what that means in terms of snowfall, because that can also not be good for the ice conditions. But if it's going to be colder, that means that we're going to have better ice conditions. So maybe we'll have a fairly full ice racing season, and that might mean that we'll actually get to take the Civic out to it. Which means that we're going to have video coverage of that. We're going to have photos, and we've actually got a 360-degree camera that I think we might try and make work, which means that you guys would get like some really cool kind of onboard racing footage. So we're going to try and make that work. So hopefully that's what happens, and we'll be out there, and you guys can actually get a laugh at watching us attempt to keep up with some of these pretty gnarly cars. Now let's talk about a little bit of the Brews of the Dudes podcast. So as you guys have seen, over the course of oh man, this is number 17, so actually this is quite a few months that we've been doing this. 17 weeks that we've done this. That's awesome. So I mean, as you guys have seen, this thing's come a long way. I would like to think that the humor is the same. It's the same couple of idiots that are cracking jokes from the beginning. It's just that it's gotten prettier and now it sounds better. So with that, we continue to try and make this better and better. And part of that is we are going to be inviting guests very soon here. We're really stoked for that. And we've been talking about it for a few weeks now that we've got a really great audio setup, thanks in huge part to Aiden, who's going to be one of our guests coming up here for sure. He'll probably end up being kind of a regular on the show. Amazing dude. He had a topic a month, which was his original podcast, which was super good. Actually would love to see that come back, but that also might mean that this equipment has to go back to him. So maybe, I don't know. I'm not sure. I'm not going to say don't do that. I'm also going to say maybe don't do that, because we love using this gear. If we have to buy our own, then we'll do it. But anyway, so we'll have a bunch of buddies coming out, a bunch of different interesting people. We are excited to try and have guests now here. So we will hopefully be kicking that off here next week. Next week is actually going to be our Halloween podcast, which we are very excited to do. That's going to be very silly. Usual thing, drinking beers, bunch of stuff that we're going to be talking about. And maybe looking a little ridiculous, maybe a little Halloween-y. Yeah, so tune in for that next week. That should be a very good time. And we're actually looking into having a few things tweaked for the podcast. So visually it might look a little bit different. We are working with some designers and thinking about making a few different tweaks to it. I've done a lot of the designing on this stuff up to this point. I went to school for graphic design back in the day. I mean, I've gone to school for a million different things. Automotive, graphic design, literature. That literature definitely didn't stick. It was fun, but it didn't stick. And so I've been able to do a bit of the tweaking to these to the overlays and all that kind of stuff, and it looks okay. It looks pretty good, but I think we might get a little professional touch here. So you'll see a few visual changes, which should be pretty sweet, and you'll see a few different tweaks with the dad mod side of it too. All right, so if you haven't yet, I would just suggest that you head on over and check out the next episode. And then I think that's everything that we've got here. So thank you very much for joining me. This one is the second of the night. I can't believe that there is still dead audio on some of these different spots. But as you guys saw, I mean, even now I had to go back and fix a thing a little bit earlier. Whatever, you live and you learn. So hopefully this is entertaining. Thank you very much for watching. We really appreciate anybody who hangs out, watches the podcast. We just, in a time, we put this thing together because, I mean, we're living through a pandemic, and we saw that, like, well, one, I mean, there was a lot of very, like, lonely posts on social media, so we thought, well, what the heck, let's throw something together. Like, Donnie and I are super comfortable being on camera, so let's put together a podcast. And we had a bunch of people coming and watching, and so the viewers have grown. We've had some really good different podcasts, and we're just going to kind of keep trying to make this get better and bigger and have a lot of fun with it. So we want to thank you guys for joining and partaking in it. So we will see you next week with the Halloween podcast. And that one's going that one's going to be a good time. So thank you very much, guys. And Lift Bridge Juice Z IPA, give it a try. We'll see you next week, and have a good one, everybody. See ya.